I knew I was in trouble when I realized the cabin had been built to keep something in, not keep weather out. This happened years before I got married, back when I still thought being alone in the mountains was the closest thing to peace a person could get. I used to disappear into the Appalachians a few times a year with a pack, a map, and way too much confidence. No service, no trail markers once I got far enough in, no one checking in on me. At the time, that sounded perfect. That trip was in eastern Tennessee, in a part of the forest where the trail thinned out and the woods started feeling old. I'd been out there 2 days already. Nothing had gone wrong. No weird sounds at night, no strangers, no signs of anybody at all. It was exactly the kind of trip I wanted. Then, sometime in the afternoon, the sky changed. It started with that heavy gray color rolling in over the treetops. I figured I'd get rained on and keep moving. I'd done that plenty of times before. But the air got cold fast, the kind of cold that bites through a wet shirt, and then the wind started pushing through the trees hard enough to make the whole forest groan. Within maybe half an hour, it got ugly. Rain came down sideways. Limbs were snapping somewhere overhead. Lightning started hitting close enough that the thunder cracked instantly after the flash. I was on higher ground with a metal-framed pack, and suddenly every dumb decision that had brought me there felt very clear. I started looking for anywhere to get out of it. Not a good campsite. Not comfort. Just cover. That's when I saw the cabin. It was off to my left through the trees, half hidden behind brush and rain. Small. Dark. Old enough that it looked abandoned from a distance. I don't think I've ever felt that relieved in the woods before or since. I practically ran to it. The door opened with one hard shove. Inside was dry, stale, and freezing. There was almost nothing in there. A busted chair, a little table, a frame where a cot used to be, and an old stone fireplace full of soot and junk. The place smelled rotten, like wet wood and something trapped too long in the dark, but I didn't care. I peeled off my soaked outer layers and sat on the floor just listening to the storm hammer the roof. For a while, I was just grateful to be alive. Then I started actually looking around. There was a rolled sleeping bag in one corner. Not new exactly, but not as old as everything else. A couple containers on the table. Some water jugs. It looked like somebody had used the place at some point. That part didn't bother me. Remote cabins get found. Hunters leave things. Hikers leave things. What bothered me was the wall by the door. At first I thought the wood was warped or damaged, but when I got close and shined my flashlight on it, I saw long scratches cut into it. A lot of them. Some thin and frantic, some deeper, like somebody had been digging at the wood with whatever they had. I checked the door next. The latch was simple, but what caught my attention was the hardware on the outside frame. There was a metal fixture there for a padlock. On the outside. Nothing on the inside. I stared at it for a second, then crossed to the window. The glass was intact, which felt strange for a shack that old. Then I saw why. Screws had been drilled into the frame from the outside, pinning it shut. The wood around the inside edge was marked up too, same as the wall by the door. Deep gouges around the corners, like someone had tried to pry it open with bare hands. That was the moment the whole place changed. A minute earlier it had been shelter. Now it felt like evidence. I remember standing there in that tiny room with rain pounding the roof and thinking, someone was trapped in here. Not just hiding. Not waiting out a storm. Trapped. And I still stayed. That's the part that bothers me most now. But storms do weird things to your judgment. It felt safer to stay in a bad place than step back into lightning and falling branches. I told myself whatever happened in there had happened a long time ago. I told myself I was letting my imagination run. I told myself a lot of things. Maybe an hour passed. Maybe less. Time was strange in there. Eventually I started hearing something besides rain. A faint dragging noise along the outside wall. I froze and listened. Then 2 heavy impacts hit the porch. Not loud enough to shake the whole place, but solid. Deliberate. I stayed where I was, trying to separate storm noise from everything else. My eyes kept drifting to the window, but I couldn't make myself look through it. I had this awful feeling that if there was a face out there, it would already be staring in. Nothing happened for a bit after that, and I started thinking maybe it was an animal. A branch. Just my nerves. Then the door pressed inward. Not a knock. Not someone trying the handle. Just slow, steady weight from the other side, enough to make the wood creak and the latch click. Then it stopped. I can still remember exactly what I thought. If somebody wanted in, they could have come in. The door wasn't locked. So why were they staying outside? And once that thought got into my head, the cabin felt wrong in a new way. All that hardware. All those scratches. The sealed window. The outside lock. What if the point of the place wasn't to keep something out of the storm? What if the point was to keep a person where they were? I didn't wait after that. I started jamming my things into my pack as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped half of it. I didn't care about folding anything. I just wanted out. I had maybe 30 seconds left before I was ready to bolt when the window exploded behind me. Glass blew across the room and something flaming came through it. For 1 second I just stood there watching the ragged bottle spin on the floor, fire spilling across the boards. Then the room went up so fast it didn't make sense. The walls flashed orange. Heat punched me in the face. Smoke folded down from the ceiling. I lunged for the door and it wouldn't open. I hit it again with my shoulder. Nothing. It was being held shut. I threw myself into it over and over until the whole thing finally gave way and came off crooked, taking part of the frame with it. I stumbled out into the rain and mud and ran without even knowing where I was going. I got maybe 20 feet. Something slammed into my back and drove me into the ground. There was a man on me. I never got a good look at his face. It was dark, rain was in my eyes, and everything happened too fast. But he was strong and wild and making these awful guttural sounds like he was furious I'd gotten out. He went for my throat first. Then my eyes. I was grabbing whatever I could, his jacket, his arms, mud, leaves, just trying to get space to breathe. Somehow I twisted enough to throw him off balance, and the second his weight shifted, I kicked free and ran. I heard him screaming behind me. Not yelling words. Just screaming. I looked back once and saw the cabin fully on fire through the trees, burning bright in the rain like it had been soaked in fuel. I looked back again later and the glow was smaller, farther away, but I couldn't stop thinking he was still behind me, still coming. Eventually I collapsed under 2 fallen trees that had leaned together and made a little wedge of cover. I shoved myself into that gap and stayed there, soaked, burned, shaking so hard my teeth hurt. I don't know how long I hid there. Hours, probably. I kept trying to listen for footsteps, but all I could hear was my own breathing and rain dripping off bark. When the sky finally started to pale, I forced myself to move. I found some kind of trail by pure luck and followed it until I came out near a road. The first person who saw me took one look at me and drove me straight to a hospital. I had burns on my arm and neck. Smoke in my lungs. Cuts all over from the glass and the fall. The doctors told me I was lucky. That word didn't feel right. I gave a statement later, but there wasn't much to give. I couldn't lead anyone back to the exact spot. I hadn't marked it. I'd gone off trail before the storm hit. All I really had was a story that sounded insane. So I stopped telling it. My wife doesn't know the full version. She thinks I just outgrew solo backpacking, and I let her believe that because it sounds better than the truth. The truth is that somebody was waiting out there in that storm. And I still don't know if he found the cabin first and turned it into a trap. Or if that cabin had always been a trap, and I just happened to walk into it before he needed it again. The worst part of that night wasn't the light below us. It was realizing by sunrise that somebody had spent hours taking apart our only way down. This happened when I was in my 20s, back when I was stupid enough to think a warning sign just made a place more interesting. My friend Charles was the kind of guy who could find anything abandoned. Old mills, tunnels, power stations, schools that should have been demolished years earlier. If it was dangerous and hard to get into, he already had screenshots and a plan. One Friday he texted me about a fire tower deep in the woods. Shut down years ago, supposedly forgotten, still standing in the middle of nowhere. He wanted to hike out, climb it, and stay the night at the top. I should have said no. Instead I asked what time we were leaving. We drove out that morning and hiked in for hours. Most of it wasn't even a real trail by the end. It was just Charles checking his phone, cutting through brush, and insisting we were close. I honestly expected the whole thing to be a bust. Then we saw it through the trees. This rusted skeleton of a tower rising out of the forest like it had been dropped there and left to rot. It was taller than I expected, with narrow metal stairs wrapping up the frame and a little square cab at the top. Some railings were bent. A few sections looked sketchy even from the ground. Charles was grinning like a kid. I was already thinking about how stupid it would be to die falling off an abandoned tower no one was supposed to be on. But we climbed anyway. A lot of it was solid enough, just old. A few steps shifted under our weight. Bolts were rusted. The last section was nearly vertical, with a narrow ladder leading into the top. It was the kind of climb where you don't look down unless you want your body to lock up. But when we got to the top, I understood why he wanted it. You could see forever. The trees stretched out in every direction, unbroken and blackening slowly as the sun went down. We sat on the outer platform with a couple beers and watched the last light disappear. For a while it was perfect. Then it got dark enough that the forest stopped looking like trees and started looking like one endless shape. That changed the mood fast. Charles noticed I was getting a little uneasy and started doing what he always did when he thought something was too quiet. Messing with me. Tapping the railing, nudging me, laughing. Then he smacked his metal bottle hard against the tower. The sound rang through the whole structure and out into the woods. One giant metallic blast that echoed so far it felt wrong. Like we'd just announced ourselves to everything within miles. I snapped at him for it. Told him to cut it out. Told him I was going inside the cab. He laughed at first, but I think he could tell I was serious because he let it go. I went inside and started laying out my sleeping bag on the dusty floor. A minute later, his voice changed. He called me back out, quiet this time. I walked over and he was pointing down into the trees. There was a light moving through the forest. At first I assumed it was someone hiking. Maybe another person heard the noise and was coming to investigate. But even from that distance, something about it looked off. It wasn't bouncing like a flashlight in someone's hand. It wasn't sweeping side to side. It just moved. Smoothly. Too smoothly. I whispered that it was probably somebody coming to tell us to get the hell out. Charles never took his eyes off it. He said, "Does that look like a person to you?" I didn't answer because I suddenly wasn't sure. We watched it for several minutes. It kept weaving through the trees, slowly getting closer. Once or twice it seemed to jump ahead in a way I still can't explain, like the gap between one tree and the next vanished and it was suddenly farther along than it should have been. Neither of us said much after that. Eventually it reached the tower. It stopped directly below us. We could see the glow on the ground through the structure, but not what was making it. No outline. No beam sweeping around. No voice. Just that pale light sitting there under us like it had arrived and was waiting. We stared at it forever. Then Charles did the dumbest thing I have ever seen him do. He leaned over the rail and called down, asking if whoever it was needed help. No response. He tried again, louder. Still nothing. The light didn't move. Now we were stuck. Because if there was a person down there, they were standing at the base of the tower between us and the ground. And if it wasn't a person, that was somehow worse. After a while I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it straight down, thinking the stronger beam would show us something. It didn't. I could light up the dirt around it. The steel supports. The grass. But not the source itself. It made no sense. It was like the glow was there without being attached to anything I could see. At some point it vanished. Not drifted away. Not dimmed. Just gone. Charles actually seemed relieved, like okay, weird prank over. I was the opposite. Seeing it disappear scared me more than seeing it there, because now whatever had been below us could have still been there and we had no way of knowing. I said we were staying inside the cab until daylight. He agreed without arguing. We laid our sleeping bags down, but neither of us even pretended to sleep. Maybe 20 minutes later, the noises started. Not footsteps. Metal sounds. A hard clang somewhere below, like a tool striking the tower frame. Then later, a scraping noise. Slow, grinding, ugly. Metal dragging against metal. It came from a different spot than the first sound. Then another. And another. It kept happening from different places around the structure, never in any pattern I could track. Every sound traveled up the steel and into the floor under us. It felt like the whole tower was being tested piece by piece. Charles and I whispered about what we'd do if we heard someone climbing. There wasn't really an answer. There was one door into that cab, one ladder down, and no backup plan. I was sitting facing one bank of windows when I saw movement. A dark shape passed across the glass. For a split second my brain rejected it because it couldn't fit what I was seeing. We were high up. No one should have been outside those windows unless they were on the platform with us. Then it crossed the next pane. I yelled and scrambled backward. Charles nearly fell over getting away from the wall. We both rushed the door and pressed against it like two idiots thinking our weight would matter if someone really wanted in. I kept waiting to see the shape again in another window. Nothing. That was somehow worse. We stayed there for hours. Neither of us spoke much after that. Every little sound felt huge. Every shift of the tower made me think somebody had stepped onto the platform outside. When dawn finally started thinning the dark, I counted down and threw the door open. No one. The platform was empty. The woods below looked normal again, which almost made the whole night feel unreal. Almost. We grabbed our stuff and started down immediately. Everything was fine until we got most of the way down and Charles just stopped dead on one of the landings. I looked past him and my stomach dropped. A whole section of stairs was gone. Not bent. Not broken loose and hanging. Gone. A stretch of metal steps had been removed completely during the night, leaving a gap wide enough that if we hadn't been paying attention, we would have stepped into empty air. I just stood there staring, trying to force it to make sense. That was what the noises had been. Someone had been dismantling the tower under us, piece by piece, while we sat above them in the dark. But that didn't fit either, because I had seen that shape outside the window after the noises started. So what the hell had I seen? And how had anyone taken those stairs off that quietly? The missing section wasn't a huge jump, but it wasn't safe either. We didn't have a choice. Charles went first and landed badly, twisting his ankle. I jumped after him and somehow made it clean. We didn't stop moving after that. There was nothing waiting at the bottom. No tools. No removed steps on the ground. No prank setup. No sign anybody had been there except for what had been taken out of the tower itself. We got back to the car and drove home mostly in silence. Even now, when I see Charles, we still end up talking about that night. He'll joke about it sometimes, but only for a second. We both know something happened out there that we never explained. I can live with the strange light. I can live with the sounds. What I still can't get over is that shape at the window. Because if someone was really out on that platform in the dark, watching us through the glass. Then at some point, they were standing just a few feet away, and we never even heard them arrive. I don't know what scared me more, the sound in the woods, or finding my own missing gear left beside a tree that looked like it had been ripped apart by hand. I'd been doing solo camping for a long time by then. Long enough to know what noises matter and which ones don't. Long enough not to freak out every time a branch snaps. I always carried a rifle on those trips, mostly because I was alone and far enough out that common sense matters more than optimism. That trip was in Kentucky. I'd taken a few days off because work had been grinding me down and I needed distance from everything. Just 3 nights in the forest, nothing extreme. Hike in, camp, clear my head, come back better. The first day was exactly what I needed. I got several miles in, found a spot near a creek, set up camp, made dinner, sat by the fire until it burned low, then went to sleep feeling calmer than I had in months. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Not to a sound exactly. More like the weird feeling that something had changed. I lay there staring at the tent wall and noticed a faint orange glow filtering through the fabric. I unzipped the flap and looked out. There was a fire in the trees. Not huge. Not spreading. Just a steady campfire-sized glow maybe a couple 100 yards off. I watched it, expecting voices or movement, but there was nothing. No silhouettes. No talking. Just the fire. I assumed somebody else had camped nearby after dark and left it burning too long. Stupid, but believable. I watched it a little longer to make sure it wasn't spreading, then went back to sleep. The next morning, I hiked toward where it should have been. I found the spot, or I'm as sure as I can be. The distance and direction lined up exactly. There was even a little clearing where a fire would have made sense. There was nothing there. No pit. No ashes. No scorched dirt. No half-burned wood. Nothing disturbed at all. I walked that area 3 times trying to make myself wrong. I wasn't wrong. It bothered me, but not enough to leave. So I kept moving. By late afternoon I'd reached a denser part of the forest where the trees were older and the air felt still even when you moved through it. I set up camp again and went to bed early. That second night was when the trip turned. I woke up to a violent cracking sound somewhere in the dark. Huge. Splitting wood, branches breaking, then a deep impact that I felt through the ground more than heard. A tree had come down somewhere not too far away. That can happen. Trees fall. But there was no storm. No wind. Nothing that should have brought one down. I was still lying there awake, trying to make sense of it, when it happened again. Another tree. This one closer. A brutal tearing sound, then a crash from a different direction entirely. I sat up immediately. 2 large trees falling on a calm night in 2 different parts of the forest did not feel normal. I remember listening to the silence after that and thinking the woods didn't sound empty anymore. They sounded like they were holding their breath. Then came the noise that made me reach for my rifle. It was low and deep and continuous, not a bark or howl or anything I recognized. The closest thing I can compare it to is a person dragging a growl out of their chest for way too long. It went on and on without changing, almost mechanical except there was something wet and living in it. I chambered around as quietly as I could and sat there aiming at the tent flap, feeling completely ridiculous and completely terrified at the same time. The sound eventually faded away into the distance. I did not sleep again. As soon as it was light enough to see, I packed up and went to find the closer tree. I needed proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. After 10 minutes or so, I found it. It was massive. Freshly down, branches everywhere, trunk split from the base. But when I got close, the break looked wrong. I'm not a logger or an arborist or anything, but I've seen storm damage before. This wasn't that. The wood at the break was torn up in long ugly grooves. Parts of the bark had been stripped away. The exposed wood was gouged and shredded, not snapped clean. It looked worked on. Attacked. Like something had worried at that trunk until it gave. I crouched there staring at it with the rifle in one hand, trying to think of any animal that could do that. I couldn't. Then I noticed something tucked near a branch on the ground. Two small things lying side by side. A blue bandana. And a carabiner. Mine. I knew they were mine before I even touched them. I dropped my pack, tore through it, and confirmed both were missing. That moment changed everything. Up until then, I'd been scared of something vague. A weird sound. A strange fire. A damaged tree. But seeing my own stuff placed there like that told me one thing with absolute certainty. Something had been near me. Close enough to go through my gear without waking me. Close enough to take those items and leave them like a message. I didn't inspect another thing. I shoved everything back into my pack, grabbed the rifle, and started moving fast. At first I tried to stay controlled. After a while I was just getting out. The whole hike back felt wrong. Not dramatic. Not like I was hearing footsteps behind me every 10 seconds. It was subtler than that, which made it worse. I'd catch myself slowing down because I felt watched. I'd turn too quickly at small noises. Every stretch of trees ahead looked like a place something could be standing just out of sight. By the time I got back to my car, I was drenched in sweat and more tired than I'd ever been after a hike that short. I drove until I had signal, then called the police. I don't think they believed half of what I told them, and honestly I understand why. Weird fire with no trace. Trees damaged in a way I couldn't explain. Missing gear found in the woods. It sounded bad even to me when I said it out loud. No one ever followed up with anything useful. I never went back. And to this day, I still think about one part more than the rest. Not the noise. Not the trees. Not even the fire with no ashes. It's the bandana and the carabiner. Because that means while I was asleep in my tent, something was close enough to reach into my life, take two things that mattered only because they were mine, and carry them away. Which means if it wanted something else, it could have taken that too.